Welcome back guys. Today we're going to be covering Lasius Niger, so stay to the end to see all the tips and tricks. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button and hit the bell to always be notified when I release a new video. These ants are very common in ant keeping and usually the first species for many ant keepers. So if you're just starting out, stay tuned because I'll be releasing a lot more tips and tricks for other species as well. The reason this ant is so good for starting ant keepers is because it's a very common ant, it's easy to find, and it's a very hardy species, which is pretty hard to kill. So if you're just starting out, I would definitely recommend this species. This is because they'll eat almost anything you give them. So when you're feeding Lasius Niger, there's a few tips to know. Feeding them high sugar foods such as jams, honeys and other sugar products like my wakushi ant nectar, which is all of my ants' favourites. But this is not all you need, you also need protein, as the queen requires protein for her entire life, and for the eggs to properly develop from larvae to pupae, they need a lot of protein, so make sure to provide adequate amounts. I give my ants protein in the form of small invertebrates such as crickets, mealworms, fruit flies, and etc. The way I prepare their food is by getting said invertebrate into a test tube or small pot and then putting it into a freezer for half an hour. But don't use glass test tubes as they could shatter. And always remember, don't use insects from the outside as they could contain pesticides and other harmful bacteria or mites for your ants colonies, so be careful. Although, if you don't want to use invertebrates, you can always resort to protein jelly. But just remember, not all species like protein jelly, and they don't always like every flavour, so if you're going to get it, make sure to buy a few different flavours to test them out with your ants, because every colony is different. And also, if you're feeding protein jelly to your ants, you could always choose honey flavoured ones, as most ants love these, and it even contains more sugar than the others. So this is one of the best choices as it's filled with carbohydrates and protein, which is perfect for your ants' brood and their workers. Okay, so now we'll move on to water towers, or sugar towers, depending on what you want to put in them. Personally, I provide all of my ants with one water tower and a few of them with a small cotton ball, which is usually filled with the same as what I put in the water towers. This happens to be wakushi ant nectar, which, well, is favoured by every single colony that I have. But remember, always give your ant colonies more than one option every now and then, as ants are pretty picky, so they might not always eat what you give them. In the wild, these ants are also known for milking aphids, which is basically the first farming ever on this planet, which, if you ask me, that's pretty impressive, as ants basically invented agriculture, as they did it centuries before humans even discovered it. But now, onto humidity and temperature. Lasius Niger aren't very picky about their temperature, as they live across all of Europe and it gets pretty cold in some places. But in no way does that mean that they don't like heat mats, as in the summer I usually provide all of my colonies heat mats and it boosts brood development by a crazy amount. But if you're using a heat mat, I'd recommend taking them off at October time, as most species from Europe hibernate during the winter. But if you're keeping something that doesn't hibernate, keep the heat mat on, as they love it. But if you don't have a heat mat, that's fine, as these ants will still thrive at room temperature. But if you're keeping these ants for the first time, you should know one thing: they go into hibernation from the end of October to the March. Remember, if you're keeping these ants in hibernation, keep them from 5 to 10 degrees Celsius, as this is pretty vital to them, as if you keep them at a higher temperature or a lower, it could kill them, or even reset their brood. So if you are hibernating them this winter, which I would highly recommend, remember, they don't really need food, they just need water, so don't give them too much food as they might ignore it or come out of hibernation too early. But now on to humidity. These ants will thrive in a 10 to 50% humidity environment, which is what a test tube will provide, or a nest which is watered. But if you are using a heat cable on that, remember to put a little bit extra water, as it will evaporate a lot quicker. But don't add too much, as it could drown the ants or their brood. But if your ants are drying out too quickly, you might have to switch nests on them, as different nests provide different levels of humidity. So a cork nest will provide it for a lot longer than an acrylic nest. So if you're not into all the fancy nests, just go for a tubs and tubes setup, which is what I have with these ants that you can see. This is the easiest and I'd say cheapest way, as you can use any old box just as long as you clean it out and, you know, have a lid for it. So if you ever have more takeaway and have some leftover clear plastic boxes, poke some holes in the lid and then just clean it out and put some PTFE around the sides. Then boom, you have an entire setup for your new ants. I would only recommend this for the easier to keep species such as Lasius Niger, as other species may escape such simple setups if it is not built properly. But if you have some extra money to spend, I would definitely recommend Urukushi, because they have one of the best, if not the best stores on the ant keeping market. And of course Ants HQ as an ant provider, as they always arrive on time and they have the best quality I've ever seen. So if you want to get some really high quality stuff for your ants, I definitely recommend those two stores, as Wakishi have some of the best nests and outwards out there. So if you do get a high quality ant nest or an outward, I definitely recommend Wakishi, and they have a lot of customizable options, so you can choose gypsum for a more absorbent substrate in their nest, or even cork for more Camponotus-like species. So remember, if you're choosing a nest for Lasius Niger, they'll choose almost anything, as they love every single type of nest and will basically just move in anywhere you give them. But that's it for now. I hope you learn how to keep Lasius Niger, and I'll see you in the next one.